It's the Sean Widmer Podcast. It's a journal by someone that just really doesn't like to write.
Today's podcast goes up late, and there's a reason for this that I didn't record last night. And I'm recording today because I waited as long as I felt I could to get everything that I could into my brain, thinking there was going to be more info. And there was not more info. I didn't get the info that I wanted. I could have just recorded this last night, I find out, but I wanted to wait so that I had the most amount of information possible before recording today's podcast. By the way, at the end of the podcast today, we will dive into Kelly's What Are You Into? And for you streamers out there, you television viewing streamers, I've got I guess it would be sort of a question for you. I need to make sure I write it down so I don't forget it. Let me see. What a great way to start the podcast. All right, there we go. So we're going to get to that at the end of the podcast. We'll get to the comments, all that at the end of the podcast. I start the podcast off by saying thank you, Patreon subscribers, patreon.com/Sean Widmer Podcast. Those of you who are cool enough to like this podcast enough, help support it. You get some bonus content. Hopefully every weekend you get a bonus episode. So hopefully, that's not enough to say thank you for supporting it, but it means a lot to those of you who like this enough to get behind it and keep the lights on. Otherwise, it looks like this. If you're watching on YouTube, otherwise, it looks like that. Lights are off. Now lights are on. Look at that. Thanks to you all. Okay, let's do it. Let's get into this. Big news out of Spokane, Washington yesterday, and it's in a world that I'm very familiar with, a world that I was part of since 2004 until 2023, and it was crazy. I saw it on social media, didn't believe it was true. And then I spent the day trying to get people to confirm it. And I got to give them credit and not credit. My boys stayed tight-lipped. Tight freaking lipped. I pried a little bit and they wouldn't budge. But yesterday in Spokane, big radio news. Dave, Ken, and Molly, morning show on 92.9 ZZU, let go. Let go. Number one morning show. Forever. Let go. And this is huge news. I immediately called, when I saw it, KJ, Kevin, who I worked with for a long time, to try to get some tea, which he did not help me out at all. Thanks a lot, KJ. I'm not going to be bitter about it. I'm not going to hold a grudge. Holding a grudge. But also to make sure my guys were all right. That was my first concern because Jay and Kevin are my guys. And I love them, and I love the show. And so I just wanted to make sure things were good. And so then I just kind of started waiting because I thought, well, this is going to be a big story. I want to talk about it on the podcast, but I want to wait until there's a statement released. And I just want to see where this goes. And then nothing came out. Nothing. I'm looking at Dave, Ken, and Molly's social medias to see if they say anything. I'm looking at news sources to see if they say anything. Finally, KXOY posted something, and it better have been KXOY. They're in the same freaking building. They're downstairs, the TV station, downstairs from radio. And they released something this morning that said, Spokane radio listeners woke up to changes on two prominent local stations Friday. As morning shows on 92.9 ZZU and KXOY 920 have been canceled. The radio stations are part of Morgan Murphy Media. That's why they didn't want me there anymore, which also owns and operates 4 News Now. And this is from my old boss, Terry. She said, we are restructuring operations to reflect current economic conditions while maintaining our commitment to our loyal listeners, partners, and community into the future. Okay, so I want to talk about this because it's near and dear to my heart. I want to start with a couple things. Number one, when I started out in radio, I did all sports. I was an AM guy. I listened to AM radio. And my competition at the time was Dennis Patchen, Rick Lukens, Bud Namick, some other people. It was Patchen and what was her name? I don't remember the gal's name. Anyways, they had the show, and that was my competition. And I'll tell you, in the mornings sometimes I would listen to Dave and Ken. Now, I was an AM radio person, so I was mainly listening to Tony Bruno and Andrew Siciliano way back then. Ben Maller, I think Ben Maller had the morning show for a little while way back then. But Dave and Ken were kind of just prominent, super famous morning show people in Spokane when I moved back to the States in 2000. They were huge. The Breakfast Boys, Dave and Ken. Monsters on the radio. I mean, I think they had started in the early 90s, late 80s. And this is one of the other reasons I was hoping stories would come out so that I would get the actual numbers on when their show was on and all that. But I would say they're late 80s, early 90s, and they had the morning show on the Zoo forever. Maybe on 96.9 for a second, or Star 96. I don't know. Anyways, they're powerhouses. Well, I get the job with Jay and Kevin. And as I was working in the radio station with them before and working on the sports station, I was always cheering for Jay and Kevin. They were my guys. They let me be on their radio show as a guest, as a stunt guy. And so I began to be like, okay, the competition is Dave and Ken. The competition is Dave and Ken. Jay and Kevin against Dave and Ken. And so you kind of build up this feeling of like, they're your sports rival. They're your rival. And I didn't know much about them. I knew of their show, but I'd never met them. And so I'm working, kind of helping out with Jay and Kevin, and I know that the whole goal is to beat Dave and Ken and who's going to be number one. There was also another morning crew in there on the rock station. What were those guys' names? The men, something men, the big men. I don't remember what they were. Obviously, it didn't matter. They were gone. But they were in the mix also. So there was like these 3 local morning shows that were vying for top position, and Dave and Ken always won. More stories on that in a little bit, because there's something we have to address. I have to address it. But let's get to this. 2009, I get hired onto KXLY, as do Jay and Kevin. So we all head down to KXLY. We are in now the same building as Dave and Ken. We're on 96.9, but 99.9 for the majority of it. We were only on 96.9 for a minute. And they're 2 doors down. The morning radio area has 3 stations. It's us, it's the rock station, and it's Dave and Ken. And so we work together every single morning. So for 14 years of my life, every single morning I'm going in, I'm saying hi to Dave Esposito. He's powering through. He'd tell me every day, Slim, how are we doing today? I'm like, good, Dave, how are you? I'm powering through. He'd say it every day. And so I would talk to Esposito, talk to Molly, talk to Ken every single day. Sometimes just the quick hello. Other times Kendall would stop by and we'd talk Eagle football, Eastern Eagle basketball. Dave, I'd always ask Dave to give me golf stories because I just always loved his golf stories, and he just has good stories in general. And I talked to Molly in the hallways as well. I saw them every single day for 14 years, and I grew to really like them. They were still our rival. Every morning I woke up to do the Jay and Kevin show. The goal was to make sure we had the best show on the radio at the time, definitely better than Dave and Ken, the other big local morning show. And there's in Spokane a bunch of nationally syndicated shows that we're powering off against as well. But, there's that thing of we got to beat the local people. We've got to beat the local show. And Dave and Ken, love you. We'll get into that here in a second. I thought we had a better show. I'm proud. I have pride. And I was always like, man, if we were on that pop station, if we were on that freaking pop station, we'd be ruling the world because that pop station has power. But they had a really good show, really awesome following. And then one of the things I wanted to say was, they are awesome. The human beings are awesome. And you know them probably from listening to them on the morning show. You feel like they're they're part of your family. You're part of their family. And I get this because I was in this, right? I was on a morning show where people feel like they are your family members. They're part of your life, and they are. And you are. And you are. You are. I mean, there are relationships I have with people that are extremely real based off of this radio thing. I would think of somebody like one of the first listeners who reached out to me when I started working with Jay and Kevin was Roberta. And she went from being somebody who was a loyal listener to the show to a genuine great friend. Okay, and that's one of many people who this is a part of, right? Where she was family. And it's a weird thing because everyone feels like they're part of your life, but there is a part of it that is showmanship. Okay, there is part of it that is showmanship. And so you listen to Jay and Kevin every morning, you listen to Dave and Ken every morning, and you think you know them, and you do know them, but there are parts like with me, when I was Slim. Something would happen to me, and it would be a good story, but Kevin and I would be like, we got to embellish it. Like, we have to embellish the story. This is for radio. There's part of this thing where we're doing a live radio show that needs to be boosted up. You've got to embellish some stories a bit. You got to make them a little more enjoyable, even if they aren't all the way 100% true. You got to, 75% true, and that 25%, let's blow it up. Let's make it seem crazier than it is. I'm not handy. Ask my wife right now. I've ruined my soon-to-be new son's wall We'll get into that later at some point. If she ever forgives me, we'll sit down with Anna and talk about that. But we made me sound a lot dumber with tools and stuff on the radio than I am, and I'm not great with them. But you just got to embellish things. So for the people who listen to Dave, Ken, and Molly every day, and you hear how they're portraying themselves on the show, and you have your opinions of it, and that's the people you know. I just want to say, outside of their show, because I didn't listen to their show, I was working at the time, they're awesome. They're awesome. Dave was always the kindest dude in the world to me. Kendall was always the nicest. Molly was so nice to me in the hallways, so funny, so friendly. We'd talk about life. So them portrayed on the radio, I'm sure there's questions like with all the people who are on the radio, how real is it, all this. I'm telling you now, from working with them every day, awesome people, fantastic people. It's a bummer what happened. I think it's a big sign of things, of things to come in that world of radio. I think it's a big sign of how that is going, that form of radio, and I kind of want to touch on that real quick. But I'm very sad for them. I'm bummed out for them. And it's a weird thing because I'm also sad for the people who had to make the decision. That's a hard one to make. My boss, Terry, who was there, she's great. And I've got to imagine she's in a rough spot right now because that's a hard thing to do. Whether or not you butt heads with people you work with or not, she always had our back across the board for the radio people. But at some point, there's a certain amount of money that you're bringing into the building. There's a certain amount of money you have to spend on employees. And when those numbers don't match up, you've got to make moves. And I'll give credit to my guys, Jay and Kevin, and I'll give credit to Coyote Country. They always had big support from sponsors and stuff. And, we worked, and Jay Bird worked real hard to make sure. He always gets credit. He worked real hard to make sure that we were generating money on that station to keep us all employed. And I'm not saying Ken and Dave and Molly didn't do that as well, but at some point, that the numbers just go that way. And here's what I wanted to bring up, because none of this firing has to do with Dave, Ken, and Molly and the quality of content they were putting on the show. It has to do with just budget stuff. I have this strong feeling in the radio world, something I'm extremely passionate about. Radio is so valuable. Radio is not going anywhere. Radio is great, but I could see it making a move in a specific way. Radio is great for music, and I think it's going to end up going that way more. Now, I'm assuming 92.9 is immediately going to get a nationally syndicated show on. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm assuming that's what's going to happen. I bet you if you tuned in Monday or Tuesday next week, they already have some kind of nationally syndicated show on the station. What it is, I don't know. But that's kind of I think, how that goes in a lot of towns where you're going to lose your local radio talent in the mornings, and you're going to get replaced with a bunch of big shows that are broadcast in the mornings across the United States, and that's how it is. And one of the reasons for that is I think radio is going to always be great for music. Always. But what you're listening to right now, what I'm doing right now, what I've been doing for a very long time, I mean, it's better than local radio. It's better than local radio. It's better than your radio. Your radio is music, and it's wonderful for that, and it needs to stay wonderful for that. But long form content, that's a podcast. Podcasts are easy to listen to on your phone, in your headphones, on your computer, however you're doing it. They're very easy to access now. I say computer. I'm just trying to make up more ways. It's on everyone's phone, right? Everyone's got their phone. They're all connected on their phone, and long form content is going to switch over to podcasts. And music is going to stay king on radio, and it's going to be great on radio, and that's not going anywhere. And radio is great for that. Great way to discover new music. It's easy. It's wonderful. I love it. But I do think that shows like Dave and Ken, that kind of show is going to be found for the most part on podcasts. And it already is. This isn't news. This is old news. This has been a while coming. And I remember one of the very first things I did with Jay and Kevin, this would have been 2010, 2011. I immediately turned our show into a podcast. Immediately. One of my first things. And we were the only radio show in Spokane who did that. I think we were the only one that did it my entire time there. I know they still do it. But I thought we've got to have the Jay and Kevin show available as a podcast immediately. And our download numbers were always really, really good. Really, really good. Because people love consuming long-form content that way. And we're used to it now, and that's what we do. And sometimes listening to long form content on the radio is super duper annoying because we're used to long form radio in the terms in the world of podcasts, and we get a 2-minute commercial break in the middle of it, and maybe there's some commercials at the very beginning of it. And other than that, that's what you get. And when you're listening on the radio, it's like, why am I getting 5 minutes of commercials right now every 6-7 minutes? Why is that happening? And you don't mind it with the music. We're used to that, but with the addition of podcasts to the world, it really makes it tough for you to have that kind of content just on radio, which is why I'm always so thankful we did that with the podcast. I think it really helped people. I think it also helped people listen to our show in the morning with more willingness to listen live on the radio, knowing that if we were talking about something and they would get frustrated that, dang it, I'm still driving and I'm in a song and I'm in a commercial. I'm about to my location, my destination. I'm not going to hear the grand conclusion to the guys sending Dalton to the coffee stand. What's going to happen? Reggie getting fake kidnapped. What's going to happen? Dang it. Knowing that they could get the podcast in a couple hours and get the conclusion. I thought it was a really valuable thing for us there. I'm very saddened today for Dave and Ken, though. Very saddened today. I reached out to Dave. I said, because I really got along with him. I really love Sposito. And I told him, hey man, the microphone's open. If you want to come on, come on. I'd love to have him on this thing. I'd love to chat with him about his career. I'd love to chat with him about 30 plus years in radio in Spokane. I'd love for him to get to say a goodbye to people who are listeners to his show. One of the hardest things I had ever in my career, and it only happened one time. I was very, very lucky about this. When I left the sports radio show for 1510 KGA, Spokane Sports Show, I knew my last day was coming up, and the building let me do one final show. It was the craziest show I've ever done. Crazy. Craig Elo called in. Kelly Graves, at the time, was the women's basketball coach. He called in. It was insane. I was getting calls from people saying, hey, thanks a lot. And it was a great moment to say goodbye. I go to Jay and Kevin's show. I got the same treatment with Jay and Kevin. Hang on. Sorry about the break there. My dog needed to be let in. She was going nuts. What I was saying was, I when I left Jay and Kevin's show, I also got the opportunity to do one last show, knowing it's my last show, and I got to say thank you to everyone who was listening. And it's a really big moment to pour in your entire life into this thing, and it's huge to get to say goodbye. It's a big thing because it's such a huge part of your life. When I did the sports show with Dan Dickow, we got let go right before we were going to go on air. We did not get to do a final show. And that show had only been on for 2 years. And I remember this pit in my gut, not getting to say goodbye to everybody who interacted with that show, because people who listen are so important. And I don't think everyone realizes it. It's why I always overthink people who listen to this podcast. I don't think people who listen understand how huge they are in our lives. And it was a big deal for me with Jay and Kevin. It was a big deal for me with the sports shows. And it was sad when I didn't get to say goodbye. And I feel awful for Dave, Ken, and Molly to not get to have the episode of closure. I feel awful for them. And so, like I said, I messaged Sposito and I was like, hey man, mic's open. If you just want to come on, I don't have nearly as big of an audience as they have, but there's enough people in Spokane listening that if he needs to come on here and just like say thank you to people, recap stuff, I'd love to have him on. And I know that's not nearly what you need in this time when you just want to close the book properly. I know this is nowhere near it, but I want to be open for him or Molly or Ken or whoever to come on and just say thanks, because I know how big that is. Okay, I've rambled for a very long time. I'm just very sad today. I'm bummed out for these guys. Thankful that my guys are still on, Jay and Kevin. It's hard to say that after being bummed out for Dave and Ken, but I'm glad they didn't get rid of everybody. I'm glad there's still local radio remaining in Spokane. It's really cool to have. It's awesome to have. And I hope the boys stay good. And yeah, it's a bummer day. It's a crazy day for radio fans and entertainment fans in Spokane. I want to read this part of the KXOY story, and let's get into the Sean Widmer portion of this. This is how the story reads, after the quote I read earlier from Terry. The changes impact the popular Dave, Ken, and Molly show on 92.9 ZZU. Dave Sposito, Molly Allen, and Ken Hopkins have been a beloved part of Spokane radio for decades, consistently named Best Radio Team in the annual Inlander poll. Okay. We got to address it. It's right there in the write-up. We got to address it. Dave and Ken, we beat you a couple years in that poll. You know that poll is phony freaking baloney. We cheated multiple years. It was confirmed by Inlander people that we had more votes. It wasn't even cheating. We just promoted it so well, and we lost because it was all a scam. All right? I got too much info on that. So the fact that it was in the write-up, I'm bitter about it. Golly gee, we had it a couple times. Now, most of the time, Dave and Ken kicked our butt. They would get that every time. But there was times Jay and Kevin had the win there. So now, Inlander, what are you going to do? Now, the good news for the Inlander is I'm no longer on the Jay and Kevin show. So they don't have the animosity there. I burnt a bridge there doing something in the 2000s. I wronged the wrong person, and they held that grudge against me forever. And unfortunately, it affected Jay and Kevin. Although it was affecting them before as well. So maybe one of the fellas did something also. But either way, or maybe just Dave or Ken or Molly was really good friends with someone in the Inlander. But either way, we never got that. So now, Inlander, what are you going to do? Because next year there's going to be a best of. So I'm predicting there's going to be one of a few things that happens. Because this is in the write-up from KXLY. Consistently named best radio team in the annual Inlander poll. Inlander's going to do one of four things. Number one, they're going to give Dave and Ken the award as sort of a memorial, as sort of a fond farewell, a lifetime achievement award, even though they'll have been off the air for the majority of the voting calendar. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, they're going to make amends with Jay and Kevin, as they should, and give them the top dog spot. And Jay and Kevin will be best radio team in the Inlander poll. Okay, that's number two. Number three, and I wouldn't put it past them, they just get rid of the category altogether. They did it to me with the podcast thing. Morrison won it one year. The next year, my podcast is on fire. Crazy numbers. It was the best year of the podcast. And suddenly the next year, Morrison didn't do a podcast, and that podcast category was gone. It was just gone. Didn't exist. Then it came back the next year, and Brennan won it with Spokane, as he should. He should win it every year. Spokane rules. So that's the third option. And the fourth option is they combined radio team and podcasts. And Brennan beats Jay and Kevin moving forward every year. And there will be Spokecast 1, Jay and Kevin 2, and whatever show around Jamie Patrick 3. Those are the four things. So Inlander, ball's in your court. What you going to do? How are you going to do this now? I love that was in the write-up. Are you freaking kidding me? We had it a couple of years. Straight up. Okay, one year I totally cheated. I mean, this would have been 2008. And we used all of the company's stamps. It was back when you had to mail in your votes. And we used all of the company's stamps and mailed in. We drove around in the Oldies 101 car and got every single Inlander. We took all the Inlanders. We had all of them. And we mailed in every single ballot. I spent a week and a half filling out ballots for the Jay and Kevin show. There was no way anyone else got a vote. We had everything. And somehow they didn't win. Crazy.
Kelly's What Are You Into?
All right. Sorry, I had to get a little bit of me in it, right? In the midst of my frustration and feeling of sadness for a local morning radio in Spokane, I had to at least get a little bit of me. I'm still me, guys. I'm still me. I'm still the problem. Gosh, I need Dave to come on here because I've got a question for Dave. I don't even want to tease it right now because I want to ask him and see how he answers. But my goodness, he was so fun to work with. Okay, what am I into right now? Man, so I'm into Star Wars, and I really want to be into Star Wars Acolyte. Okay, this is almost a Kelly's What Are You Wanting to Be Into? Star Wars Acolyte. I want to be into it. And I've had so many mixed reviews. I tried to call Marcus about it last week. He didn't answer his phone. I heard from one of my friends in my Tuesday night game group that it's really good. Then I saw online that I saw some mixed reviews. Right now, though, on Rotten Tomatoes, it's got an 85. Okay, IGN gave it a 7 out of 10, though. Rotten Tomatoes, though, 85% is really good. And so I really want to be into this. I love Star Wars. Always have, always will, even if they're spamming us with way too much content right now. We have no content from Return of the Jedi all the way till Phantom Menace. No content, right? We're just getting books. It's just books. Timothy Zahn is writing book after book. And so we get that. And now all of a sudden, it's just like, if you want Star Wars, there's a new something, cartoon, show, whatever it might be. Adult animated. That sounded weird. But an animated show that's not like for little kids, you know what I'm saying? You've got content like crazy from Star Wars. Movie, one-off movie. It's just everywhere. So now this it's overpopulated, the Star Wars world. I want to get into this Acolyte show. So if someone's out there and they can give me like a legitimate review, I think Ian sent me one. I need to go back and look at that. And I don't remember if he said it was good or bad, but that's what I need. My Kelly's, what do you want to be into? Let's read some comments. Let's get out of here. Roberta said this on YouTube. Oh, wait, no. Already did that one. Already did that. Wait, no, I didn't do that one. Never mind. Michael and I were talking about the MLB. And so Roberta said this. MLB is my sister's favorite channel. She's a baseball addict. When we were kids, my parents asked Mom's cousin to take the car for the girls to play in Little League. He wouldn't do it and said no one ever would. Shelly was the best ball player in the neighborhood. We memorized the teams off the back of Wheaties boxes. So many good baseball memories at Anchorage, Glacier, Pilot games. Roberta, that's great. Roberta, I gave you the shout out earlier. I mean it when I say it. Family. And I'm all in on baseball. It's hilarious. Since I talked to Michael and since I've started watching the Mariners, they're 0-2. They lost 8-0 the first night that I watched a full game. So there you go. That's a great welcome in. Maybe it's me. Sharon said this, I'm going to Nashville next week. Where's a good place to eat? Congratulations on your new podcast. Thank you, Sharon. Okay, Las Palmas. And I don't know if that's going to be one that you like, but I like it. My wife loves it. Her best friend Emily loves it. Las Palmas. It's Mexican. So if you don't like Mexican food, don't go there. Otherwise, like honestly, if you're going to Nashville and you stay at a hotel, I would say one of the best things you can do, ask the people working at the front desk where to eat, and they're going to be money. They're going to be money because they're two things. One, they're going to know places that are close that are really good, so you're not journeying way far away. And two, they're always going to be up to date with the new restaurants because something new is always opening in Nashville. So make sure to ask the people at your hotel. Yvonne said this, congrats, sounds good. Thank you. And I'm glad it sounds good. I needed that. Like Dylan said this. Dude, that's awesome. It's about the Joe Nichols podcast. Dude, that's awesome. Congrats on that deal. I don't do the YouTube video yet, but the sound is dialed. Okay, good. Thank you. Moving all the equipment around always worries me. And then Ian said this about the baseball talk. Ian said, surprised Angel Hernandez wasn't brought up during baseball talk. So only Survivor season I tell people to watch is the one with the Miami Dolphins manager, as one of my middle school friends was in that season. Ian, okay, I'm interjecting. Ian, what? That was Jimmy Johnson season. I believe he doesn't make it super far into that season. Who's your middle school friend? I got to know. All right, Ian goes on to say, his Kelly's What Are You Into? Covers, as in music covers. Discovered Tsushima has New Game Plus and an Elder Ring level of difficulty if you do New Game Plus. I'll be streaming Final Shape soon if you want the story journey. Want the story and the journey. Had to prepare myself for some things I know are going to happen. Wasn't ready. Still am not. So a couple things there. Ian, into covers. I love music covers. If anyone runs into good music covers, send them to me. I love them. And then video game talk was the rest of that. Streaming Final Shape. That's the new Destiny stuff. I actually don't know anything about it, Ian. I get the notifications. You freaking stream late because you got little kids, so you got to wait till your kids go to bed. So by the time Ian on the West Coast is streaming, it's the middle of the freaking night here. Legitimately. 1 a.m., 12 o'clock. So I try to peek in for a second, Ian, and I'll try again next time I get the notification. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.